Hey guys, how are you? So welcome to a new video, and in this video I'm going to create an API and I'm going to guide you how you can create a new API or your first API using Python and Flask. Flask is a web framework for Python, and using Flask you can create a web application like a web API or a web backend. So we are going to create an API and the API will be named as Todo API. This API can fetch all the to-do data, get a to-do data by ID, create a new to-do data, update an existing to-do data, and delete an existing to-do data. So let us first see the demonstration of what we are going to make. So we have 5 endpoints: get to-dos, get to-do by ID, post a new to-do, post means creating a new to-do, put to-dos, it means you want to update a to-do, and delete a particular to-do. So I'm using a Postman to make my calls. So let's try the first call, which is get call. The API is hosted locally, so the URL is 127.0.0.1. The port is 5000. To fetch all the to-dos, we are going to hit this slash to-dos endpoint. Let us hit this request and we will get a response. So in response, we are getting all the to-dos which our application is having right now. So it is a list and list of all the to-dos, and every to-do is a JSON. And in every JSON, you will find that there are three keys: done, ID, and task. Done will represent, is this to-do done, is this task done or not. ID will represent its ID or identifier, and this will be unique for all the to-dos. And there will be a task title which is learn Python or build first REST API. So that is what we are going to do in this video. You will notice we have two to-dos right now. So let us try to fetch a particular to-do by its ID. So let us try this ID number 1. So for that we are going to go to this to-dos by ID endpoint. The endpoint is slash to-dos slash its ID. So here we are going to specify the ID. So let's try for ID number 1 and hit the request, and you will get this JSON data which is for the ID number 1 to do. Done is false, ID is 1, and task is learn Python. You can verify it from get all to dos as well. This is the same data we are getting. Next, what if you try to fetch a to do by ID and that ID does not exist? For example, ID number 3. Once you hit the request, you will get a response like to do not found, and this is an error. And even the status code is 404, right? 404 means not found. Earlier it was 200. Let us try again with ID1 and you will see it is 200. 200 is for get to dos as well. So now let us try to create a new to do. For that we are going to make a post call to our to dos endpoint. So let us make a post call to the same endpoint, and this time we are going to send some data. We are going to send some JSON data, and JSON data will have a key, task, and the value, whatever task or to do title you want to set. So let us try to create a task with title learn by doing. Hit send and you will see that 201 created. So we have created a new to do and the ID is 3 now. This is unique. Done is by default false and task is whatever you will send. So now if you will try to fetch the to dos by ID with ID number 3, hit send, you will see that done, false, ID 3, and task is learn by doing. So we are able to fetch our newly created to do. Now what if you want to update the status of the to do from done false to done true? So for that we are going to make a put call to the same to-dos endpoint, and also we are going to specify the ID as well. So slash ID, whatever ID you want to update for. So let us try to update the ID number 3 and set the done as true. Hit this request and you will get a 200 response. It means that the request is successfully processed and we have got our data that done is now true, ID is 3, task is learned by doing. Now if you try to fetch the task again, you will see that done is true, right? And lastly, let us try to delete the to do. So for that we are going to hit this to do slash ID endpoint, and whatever ID you want to delete for, you can specify the ID. Let's try for ID number 3, hit enter, and this time you will see we are sending a delete request and the delete is processed successfully. So we have got 200 OK response and message as to do is deleted. So this is just a basic API, and this is one of the best project which you can create to get started in creating some APIs. So I think now you are excited to create this API. So let us try to do it. And before that, okay, let me show you one more thing. Now if you try to fetch the to do by ID again, ID number 3, you will find this error message again because we deleted it, right? Okay, let's try to create the code one by one. I will be using a VS Code to create my code, but you can use any code editor of your choice. And this is our project which is already created, to do API Flask. This is just a folder in which I am having the main.py file. We are going to write our logic for this API in this particular main.py file. So to install Flask, we need to run a command in our terminal: pip install Flask. hit enter, wait for some time, and it will install Flask. So you will see that, okay, so we have got this successfully installed Flask message. So let us clear the console and let us import Flask. So to import Flask, we need to write from Flask import Flask. Okay, using this class Flask, we are going to create our Flask application or Flask web API. To create our Flask app, we need to write app is equal to Flask, and inside this we can pass an argument underscore underscore name underscore underscore. Now this line will create a new Flask application, and using this app we are going to configure our API. At this point of time, we don't have anything in our application, but let me show you how can you run this application. To run the application, we need to say app.run, and since we are doing the development, inside run we will pass an argument debug is equal to true. This is something we set true only when we are doing the development, but when you are deploying this API to some production server, we don't set it as true. But for now, let's set it as true, and this will run your application. But before running it, just let us follow the best practice. We should not directly call this in our main.py file. There will be a condition if underscore underscore name underscore underscore is equal to underscore underscore main underscore underscore. And when this condition is true, then only our application will run. And what this does is, let us say you are importing this particular Python file in some other Python file. So you do not want that this application should run when you are importing it. So for that, we need to write this logic. So what this will do is, it will only run the application when we are actually running the main.py file, and it will not run when you are importing main.py in some other file and running that other file. So I hope this will clear this fact that why are we having this if condition. Now to run the code, it is very simple. We just run it like any other Python file. We need to say Python in our terminal, Python main.py. Hit enter, and this will start your development server. Right now we don't have anything. So if I go back to Postman and try to hit the same endpoint again, let us try to fetch all the to-dos. Hit enter. You will see that 404 not found, and the message is the requested URL was not found on the server. This is because we have not created this URL slash to-dos, right? We have not created it as of now. So let us create our first endpoint slash to-dos. For that, we need to create a function def get to-dos, and you don't need to write anything for now. Now we have a function get to-dos. Now let us implement our logic. So let us create a response. Response is equal to empty array or empty list. For now, let us keep it empty. And to return a response, we need to say return response. Save this. And again, if you go back to your Postman, you will see that nothing will happen even though we have written some logic. And the reason is, we need to set the path, because Flask will not know what is the path. We need to set the path, and whenever a user will call that path, this function will be called. So to do that, we need to add a decorator to our get to do's function. So let us add it. To add a decorator, we need to say at app.route. So we are creating a route in our application, and the route is slash to do's. Now once you save this, you will see that since we have run our program already, whenever there is a change in our file, it will automatically restart the server with the new code. So we have added this slash route. I missed to tell you one thing. Let me close the program and run it again. To get this URL, whenever you will run your program for the first time, you will find in your console a URL. And now this is the URL, which is the URL or the host for our web application. So from here, you can copy this URL and paste it in your Postman, and then you can add this slash to-dos endpoint to call this function. So since we have added the slash to-dos, let us try to call this slash to-dos now, and let us see what happens now. So once you call this time you will see that we are getting a JSON response, and this is an empty array or empty list, but at least we are not getting 404. And the thing to notice over here is, it was so simple to add an endpoint in our API. Just create a function and create a route for this, and anytime somebody hit this route, they will get the response given by this function. Now let us make this response better. First thing is, we want to call this slash to do's only with get call. So if somebody is making a get call, it's fine. But if somebody is making a post call or put call, we want to handle it in different way. So it is something we will not handle in this function. So for that we will say comma methods is equal to an array. And in this methods we will specify what are the allowed methods for which this function will be called. So right now you will see methods is empty, And again, if you will try to go to back to Postman and try to hit the endpoint, you will see that method not allowed. So get method is not allowed. So we need to allow this get method for this particular endpoint, right? And to allow this, we just need to specify that. So in methods, let us say get, and that's it. We have created our first endpoint in our API, and this endpoint slash to dos will only be called when the method is get. And what is the response it is going to give? An empty list. But we need to return some data, right? So let us create a dummy data. For now, we are not going to store our data in some database or some file. So let us store our data directly as a dummy. So inside this application, let us create our data. So data is equal to a dictionary, and in this dictionary we are going to specify our data. So I already have some data, so let me do one thing. Let me copy it and paste it here, and you will see that we have two data, and this is a dictionary, right? The dictionary is having two keys, 1 and 2. These keys are representing the ID of a task, and for every key the value is itself a dictionary, which is something like a JSON, and inside this value we have two keys, task and done. Task is the task description and done is the status, and same goes for the ID number 2. We have a task and we have a done status. All right, so we have our dummy data ready. For now, let's try to understand the API thing and not focus on where is the data stored, right? So this is our dummy data. You can pause the video and copy this data in your own code, or you can try to create your own data. So let us now proceed further. And this time, if somebody calls this slash to do's endpoint, we need to return this data, right? So instead of response as an empty list, we just need to say response is equal to data. And now if you will come back to your Postman again and try to hit the endpoint, you will see that we are getting the data. But right now we are getting the data inside a JSON, right? We want to return a list, because when somebody is asking, give me all the to-dos, it should be a list. It should be more than one data and should not be inside a JSON. So let us try to change that. Let us implement some logic for this. What we are going to do is we are going to run a loop in our dictionary. So let us do that. For key comma value in data dot items, and before that make the response as empty again. We are going to update the response, and what we are going to do is we are going to add some data in our response. So every time we will encounter a data in this for each loop, in the for loop we will add a data. So let us add this data. So we can say response dot append. We are going to append some data, and what are we going to append? Let us see. We are going to append another dictionary. Now we know that we have a value, right? This value is this particular data, and the key is the key, right? The key will be 1 or 2, and the value will be the first data, the first task, or the second task. We just need to add the 2 inside this data. So for that, let us create a temporary data. Temp is equal to value. Temp will also have an ID field. So let us add this ID field, and this will be equal to the key. And we just need to add this particular temp inside our response. So response dot append temp. Once you save this code and go back to your Postman, and before we go back to our Postman, run the code again. Now let us get back to Postman and try to hit this endpoint. And this time you will see that we are having this JSON data, a beautiful JSON data, and we are having this as a list, and inside the list we have the tasks, right? So this endpoint is done. That's all for this endpoint. The get all to-dos endpoint is done. And you have created your first endpoint in your first API which you are creating using Flask. Next, let us try to implement the next endpoint, which is get a particular task or to-do by the ID. Now, I think you have the idea. How are we going to create a new endpoint? Nothing special. We are just going to create a new function for it. So get to-do. And this time we need to pass an ID as well, right? Because the user will give us an ID for which it is trying to get the data. And for that, we just need to pass this ID. The ID will store the ID of the query which the user will send. And inside this, we are going to have our logic. So what do you think? What can be the logic? So the logic is very simple. We have a data, right? We just need to return the ID which the user has requested for. Let's just return the data ID. Now the problem is, if there can be a condition, there can be a chance that this ID does not even exist. So let us try to see what will happen. First, let us add the route for this function. So for that, we need to add a decorator at app.route. and inside the route, I'm going to write the route for fetching the to-dos by ID. So we will say slash to-dos slash. Now you have to give this angular braces. Inside this, you need to pass two things. Why are we having this angular braces? This denotes that this is the dynamic part in our URL. See, in our URL, to-dos is fixed. Every time we are going to write the to-dos to perform any operation on our to-dos. But this part where we are specifying the ID, it is dynamic. And when it is dynamic, we need to specify few things. And the format is data type of the data which we are expecting from the user. So it is integer. So int colon which variable is going to store this data which the user will send. So the variable is ID, right? You see we have defined the ID in the function. So whatever ID the user will pass, this part of the URL will try to resolve it and it will pass that value to ID. So we have specified our URL. Now also specify the method. So methods is equal to get. This endpoint will be called for get method. And we are good for now for the get to-dos by ID endpoint. Let us go back to Postman and try to hit this endpoint. So let us go back to this to-dos by ID endpoint and try to get the ID number 1. When you will hit enter, you will get your data. Now the first thing is ID is missing in our data. You see this is our data, but it is not having ID inside this. The reason is, if you see the actual data, this is our data. The data is not having the ID inside this. It is just having task and status done. ID is something which the user has passed, right? So let us try to create another temporary data. Temp is equal to data of ID and add another key in the inside this temp. So temp of ID is equal to the ID given by the user and just return the value of temp. For now, this should be good. Let us go back to our Postman and hit the same request and you will see ID is also there in our response. Now there is a problem with our get to dos by ID endpoint. It is good for the ID which exists, but if the ID does not exist, for example ID is 5, say, and you hit it, you are getting some internal server error, and this is a really bad thing for an API to return this kind of response. Let's go back to the code, try to resolve it. And where is the problem? The problem is we are directly fetching the ID, we are not checking if it exists or not. So let us add a condition. If ID in data, if it is in data, then only we are going to return this temporary data or whatever data we created. But if it is not in the data, else we can directly return a message. So let us try to return a JSON message. So this will be a dictionary which will be equivalent to a JSON. Inside this there will be a key error and message can be anything. Let us say to do not found. Save this. Now go back to your Postman again, and this time you will see that your code is able to handle the situation. It is to do not found. But there is another problem. The thing is, if you are trying to get the ID number 1, it is good. The data is good and the status code is good as well. But when you are trying for ID number 5 or the to do ID number 5, the data is good, but the status code is 200. This should not be 200. This should be 404, right? Whenever a data is not found, we return 404. Let us see how we can do that. So let us go back to our code again. And where are we going to configure this? Just after the return, where we are returning our data, give a comma and return the status. This is how we return a particular status. By default, it is 200. If you do not want to return 200, we can make it 404 here, right? So let us go back to Postman again and try to hit the same endpoint, send, and now the status code is also updated. So we have implemented two endpoints, to-dos, get all to-dos, and to-dos by ID. So I think we are doing good as of now. Let us continue in our coding part. Let's try to create this post to-dos endpoint. Post to-dos endpoint is having the same path to slash to-dos as we had it for get all to-dos. The only difference is we need to make a post call and this will create a data. This is what we are going to implement. Let us go back to our code again, and we already have this get to do created. Minimize it, and get to do's also we can minimize just for the readability. Let us create another function def post to do or post to do's, and this is going to accept some data, right? Post to do's will have some data inside this, and when we are saying post to do's, we are expecting some data from the user. expecting some JSON data. We will see how we will deal with it. For now, let us make this code empty or the function empty and add our route. You can copy the same route from this get all to dos function, paste it over here, and just change the method to post. This function will be called for slash to dos with post call or post method call. Now what do you want to do in this post function? We need to create a new data, right? Now to create a new data, we should know how we can fetch the data. Flask provide an object called as request which accepts your request data. So when we go back to our Postman again, and you will see this data, the JSON data which user will send to our API. This is a request data, whatever request user is having, and Flask is having a method for it. Go to the first line of this code where we imported Flask and give a comma and write request. What this will do is it will import this request object, and this request object is the one which accepts your request data. It has your data. Let us fetch our data in our post to do function. So to fetch the data, we will say data is equal to request dot get JSON. This will get our data as a JSON. Now let us create a new to do data. So let's call it as to do is equal to a new dictionary data. This will have three keys. Task, it will have some value. So for now, let us keep it empty. Also, we will have done status, which is by default false. Let us set it as by default false. Now we have a to do data. We need to add this to do data in our actual data. Okay, let's do one thing. Let's change this data to request data. This is just to make sure that we do not confuse with the names, because the data is our actual data outside of this function. So, and we need to add this new data or the new to do given by the user in our original data dictionary, right? So for that, we can say data of some ID, right? We will see how we can provide the ID. This will be equal to do. What will be the key here? The key will be the new ID for this to do. And how can we find the new ID? Let us go back to our data and observe a thing. See, our data is having two to dos. The ID is 1 and 2, and we need to add a third to do. How we can do it is just fetch the length of our data, which is 2, and add 1 into it. So the key will be length of our data plus 1, and this is going to be our new to do data. What are we going to return? We are going to return a JSON, right? And the status code as 201 because we created our data. Now what are we going to return in this JSON? We are going to return our to do along with the ID. So once we have added our to do in the data, we can also do one thing. We can add a key in our to do. So let us say to do, add a key ID, and the ID for this new to do is length of our data plus 1. Now you just need to return the to do, and this will contain the new to do which is created along with its ID, and the status code will be 201. And the only thing left to update here is the actual task which was sent by the user. So to fetch the task, we are going to fetch the task from the request data. The request data is like a JSON, so we can just say request data, and inside this we can pass task. So this is going to fetch the task which was passed by the user. So our post function is also completed. Let us try to run this post. So for that, let me clear the console and run our program again. And we will quickly do one thing. Let us first try to fetch all the to-dos. Hit enter and see we have two to-dos right now. Let us go to the post endpoint to check its functionality. We will have the same input, or let me update the input just for the demonstration. Updated, right? Hit this endpoint and you will see that post endpoint is now having 3. Okay, ID is 4. Okay, I got this. The problem is we did plus 1 2 times. So let me go back to the code and do one thing. See, we already have updated the length of our data. So this will represent the actual ID and not plus 1. So let me get rid of this. Save the code and let's try to do the demonstration again for the post endpoint. Let's go to Postman. Hit the get to do's endpoint again. And we have two to do's, right? Go to the post endpoint and hit enter. And now you will see that we have this new task created in our to do's data. We have the done status as false, ID as 3, and task is learn by doing updated. And let's do one more thing. Let's try to create one more data. Updated again. This is our task. Or let me just completely change the message as new data or new data slash to do. hit enter or send this request, and you will see the ID is 4. We have fourth data or fourth task or to do created. Done is false by default. Task is whatever the user will pass. And if you fetch the to-dos again, all the to-dos, this time the total number of data is 4, and these two data is something we just created. And you can check the to-dos by ID endpoint as well. For 5 it will still give you this error because we don't have 5 to-dos, but we can hit the ID with 4 and we will get the new data. So we have implemented 3 endpoints. Now the next endpoint is updating our data, right? For that we are going to make a put request. So let us first create the function def put to-dos, and this will accept an ID because we are going to update our to-do by its ID. For now, don't write any code inside this. First, let us write what will be the path of this particular function. Which path is going to call this function? So this will be same as get to-dos by ID. Let's copy this and only change the methods. The method will be put. Anytime you are making a put call to the to-dos endpoint with an ID, this is going to call this. What are we going to do here is, first we are going to check if this to do actually exists or not, and for this we can make use of the existing logic which we have in our get to do endpoint. So let us do that. So this is the get to do endpoint with ID, and let's copy the complete code. For now, copy this, minimize it again and paste it in the put to do's endpoint. Paste this one. Here what we are doing is we are trying to fetch the data. We are not going to fetch it, we are going to update it first. But we already have this logic that if the ID does not exist, if this condition is false, we are just going to return to do not found. We are not going to do the update. But if the ID exists, we are going to update our data, and to update our data, we will get some data from the user. See, what are the data we can get from the user? We can get two types of data. In the put, we can get the done to be true or false, or the task description or the task title, which can be updated as well, right? So we can also pass task as well and get it updated. So to implement this, what we need to do is, let us jump back to our code editor and let us write the logic for this. So we have already fetched it inside the temp. Now we are going to update two things, temp of task and copy this temp of done status. Both will be updated. And what are we going to set this? Let us set it to none for now. We are going to replace this none. First of all, we also need to get the request data which the user has sent. So request data is equal to request dot get JSON. The same logic which we had in post to do's. To fetch up the request data, we are going to call the request dot get JSON. The request is the object which we just imported from Flask. Let's go back to the put to do's endpoint, minimize the post to do's, and we have our request data. What we are going to do is we are going to fetch the new task data from this request data. But there can be a condition that the user might try to update the task or it might not try to update the task. So let us make use of the get method of a dictionary. So we are going to say request data dot get. So let's try to get the value of task, right? What this will do is it will try to fetch if task is passed in our request or not. If it is there, then good, the task will be updated. But if it is not there, then that's the problem. Then in that case we are going to set the default value as the current task value. The current task value is stored in temp task. So temp task, right? So this way, if user will pass the task, it will get updated. If user will not pass it, it will be set to the original value. And the same thing is something which we are going to do for done as well. Paste the code, and this time we are trying to fetch the done. But if it does not exist or the user has not passed this value, it will be set to the default or the original value. The ID will remain same, so we can get rid of this line. And now once this temporary data is updated, we need to first also update this inside our data, right? So we can see data of this ID is now this particular temp data. So this way the data is updated now, and we also need to return the updated data. So for that we can say that temp of ID, we are going to add one ID to it, is equal to ID, and we just need to return the temp. That's it for the put to do set now. So this is the complete code for put to do's, that is updating the to do by ID. Let me minimize this. Go back to, okay, before going back, let me run the code again. Clear the console and run the code. Let's go back to Postman and try to update an existing to do. For that, let us, since we have restarted our server, the data will be gone because this is not saved in some kind of database. If you will send the request again, you will have these two to dos back again. Let us try to update the to do with ID number 1 and set the done as true. Let's go to put to do slash 1. We are trying to update the to do with ID 1, and we are going to set the done as true, and we are going to update the task, and the current value is learn Python, and let's update it to learn Python and Flask. Save this, send the request, and in the response you will get the newly updated data for ID number 1. The data is done is true and task is learn Python and Flask. You can verify this by fetching all the to-dos as well, and this time you will see the ID number 1 is updated, right? What if we try to update an ID which does not exist? Let us try with 5. Hit the request and a simple error message will be there, to do not found and 404 not found. Well, I think this is good for the put functionality or the updating a particular to do by ID. The last thing which we are going to do or which we are going to create is delete endpoint. I think now you have the idea of what needs to be done. So let us try to do it a little bit quickly. Create a function def delete underscore to dos and just pass the ID which we want to delete. Copy this particular route, paste it over here and make the method as delete. Now inside this, we can just say that data, the original data which we have, and data dot pop. What do you want to pop? This particular ID is something you want to pop. And we want to avoid a situation in which the ID does not exist. See, there are a lot of things which we can do in this case. But for now, what I will do is, even if the ID exists or does not exist, the ultimate goal is if a particular ID is being passed to delete, it should not exist after the delete operation is performed. So even if it does not exist, we can directly say it is deleted, or even if it exists, we can say the same thing, that it is deleted successfully. So let us do that. We are not going to handle the logic of an ID exists or not. Yes, you can do that, but for now, let us just pop this ID, and to avoid that error, we can just say none and directly return a message, return a JSON, and the message will be to do deleted successfully. That's it. That's it for this complete CRUD operation, creating, updating, retrieving, deleting all the data of to-dos. That's it, right? Let's go back to the Postman and try to hit the delete endpoint. Since I have run the server again, the data is again reset. You will see that we have the same default data. Let us go to delete and try to delete the item number 1. Send, and you will see message to do deleted successfully. You will go to get this get to dos, hit enter, and you will not find the ID with 1. You can try with ID number 1 again and it will have the same message, because this is not going to impact our data, because the data doesn't even exist, and that's what the user want, that the ID number 1 should not exist. You can try with ID number 3, the message will be same. So I think that's it for this particular to do API using Flask. Now there are a lot of enhancements you can do. You can add a date, instead of using this static data, you can add a database, you can add a file, CSV file, or you can introduce some authentication. We can have some validation on our data. All these things we can definitely do, and we will do it in the next upcoming videos. But for now, this is a good starting point to understand how we can create an API, a fully fledged API using Flask. So I hope you guys liked this video, and I hope you will subscribe to the channel as well if you have not subscribed yet. That's the best way you can support me. I am just getting started in this content creation thing, where I am trying to create some content which can help the developer community. So that's it for this video, guys, and I am hoping to see you guys again. And make sure you also add some kind of comment so that I know that did I do well, or I need some improvements. I know I do need some improvements, so definitely add it in the feedback, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching, guys, again.